Over the course of this season, we've talked about a bunch of surprising prospects that have jumped into the NHL successfully. But today, I wanted to do something a bit different, going through a bunch of prospects outside of the NHL who are succeeding in surprising ways. So make sure you guys watch till the end as we talk about some prospects here that don't get talked about enough for just how well they're playing this season. And make sure you hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this all throughout the year, especially with the World Juniors coming up. You won't want to miss a thing. Now, for today's video, I have 10 prospects lined up that we're going to be talking about. I'm excluding anybody that we have talked about extensively throughout this season before. Guys like William Horkoff, Alexander Soroski, Sergei Murashov, some really great, surprising performances, but we've already gone in depth before, so let's give some new guys the spotlight here. But let's start the video out today with a player that has rebounded in such a major way, and that is former first-round pick of the Boston Bruins, Dean Letourneau. The interesting part to me is that I think Letourneau was playing better than he was letting on last season. Even though he only had 3 assists and 0 goals in 36 games, I think he was having some pretty poor luck last season as a freshman. But quite frankly, I think should have been in like the USHL last season in general. This year should have been his freshman year. And if you take that into account, I think Letourneau looks a lot more interesting as a 6'7", 229-pound centerman, somebody that has a ton of skill. Look what he's been doing so far this year. After having only 3 points last season, he's up to a point per game, 14 points and 6 goals through 14 games for a BC team that's kind of been a bit all over the place over the season. You can make the case that Letourneau has had a bit more of a consistent season than even James Hagan's up to this point, and even though I think Hagan's has a much more potential, in Letourneau's case, he's starting to finally show why he was a first-round pick and why he was so admired at the time. The reason he's on this list, though, is because he's on such a higher level than I even thought he would be at this point in his career. He's somebody that I thought would have had a solid season, a bounce back year for sure, but to be a point per game and honestly deserving of a few more points as well on top of that from the games I've watched, that's pretty special for somebody that still is pretty raw at this stage. This is why I preach opportunity and the ways these players play in their lineups as a big reason for big point totals or a disappointing season. In Letourneau's case, last year he was playing 4 fly minutes. This year he's on that top 6, but also backing it up with some pretty nice production. Now we go on to another forward that's actually in a pretty similar position with Harry Nansi of the Toronto Maple Leafs. As a 5th rounder in last year's draft, I thought it was really interesting value outside of the top 150 because when I did see Nansi play last year, the points weren't there, but you could see the potential coming out. As a 6'3", 179-pound forward, he's something that I find fascinating because last year, the point production wasn't the worst in the world, but for a draft eligible, you want a bit more juice. Just 23 points and 7 goals through 67 games for Owen Sound, but you do have to consider that Owen Sound last year was rough. But this season, as you can see, the production has absolutely exploded. Even though he's gone a bit cold recently, still has 35 points in 28 games on pace for an 84-point season. Another situation like Letourneau where he's just getting more minutes, and quite frankly, I think the bounces are actually starting to go his way. It was kind of ridiculous how many chances Nansi continually set up that just weren't finished upon last year. Now those chances are finally getting scored on. But I do think Nansi's a bit faster, a bit sharper with his decision-making too in general, which does help, plus a great frame and some great tight skill makes Nansi a pretty intriguing prospect. I'm still not sure whether Nansi will be more of a power forward or more of that perimeter playmaker in the NHL, but somebody that I think could round out as an interesting bottom 6er one day, and hey, in the 5th round, that's not looking too bad. Moving on to another 5th rounder from this last 2025 draft, we move on to Ethan Wittenbach out of the Calgary Flames, 144th overall selection. Another case where I expected this prospect to have a solid start to his NCAA career, but certainly not this good. Wittenbach was a player that I was a bit up and down on. A couple of games I watched, he was a bit invisible, and then one game I watched, he would be absolutely electric of his offensive skill set. And in the USHL, that provided some pretty great point totals. 24 goals and 51 points through 44 games. Again, I was expecting him to have a really good offensive season for Quinnipiac on a team that needs a bit more of a pace pusher. Wittenbach can be that. I was expecting maybe a point per game, which would be pretty great for a 5th rounder. But look what we're seeing so far. Through 16 games, 8 goals, 22 points. But it's extremely impressive scoring for a freshman, and you see in Wittenbach's case, he's already 7th in NCAA scoring, and with the least amount of experience within that top 10. That player he's tied with in points, by the way, in Bennett Shimmick of Arizona State, is 22 years old, so the difference there is pretty stark. On the Flames front, it was a bit of a shame to see him and Colin Potter not invited to the U.S. World Junior Camp. In Winbuck's case, I'm a little bit less surprised because he's a bit more all offense, a little bit lackluster defensive effort, but at the same time, I still would have had him there for just how good and how just consistent he has been this year for Quinnipiac, a true difference maker for that team as they've gotten back to a really good level this year. Now let's move on to our first goaltender of a few on this list, in Thomas Milich of the Winnipeg Jets system. Now this is interesting because he has been playing with the Jets most recently, but has been mostly playing in the AHL this season. But his rise compared to last year is pretty astounding. Now, granted, Manitoba was just a complete disaster in the AHL last year, but he had an .877 save percentage in 21 games last year, and played a big chunk as well in the ECHL, where he did get a lot better numbers. But this year, it's been a complete change of pace. A .921 save percentage in the AHL through 9 games, and has deserved that call-up, playing 2 games already. Not the most successful, but also the Jets haven't been great either. But Milich is a favorite of mine because of his story and just how much adversity he's gone through, how many different leagues he's played in, and how much he's been willing his way to the NHL already. As a 5th rounder back in 2023, he earned that after having a great season in the WHL, and of course being the starter for Team Canada at the U20 World Juniors, which was great to see. You always have these goaltenders in the World Juniors that show up and then play well, but you never really hear from them again. But Milich just felt a bit different, even though he was a smaller goaltender at 6 feet. That hasn't stopped him from now being an NHL player. And even though I expected him to play some games eventually, I didn't expect it to be this early. Now, granted, the Jets have had some injuries, of course, to Connor Hellebuyck, so that does help Milich in terms of his progression into the NHL, but I'm just super happy to see him there because it's been well earned over the years. Now let's move on to a Swedish forward here that's really been surprising me for just how productive they've been. Let's go on to Eddie Genborg, 44th overall pick by the Wings. Now for reference, I was pretty high on Genborg last year, ranking him 34th in my rankings, but that was just because of the great physical edge he had, the smarts with his play, and just how much I thought there was a bit of untapped offensive potential. Well, it's certainly been tapped this year. He's had a great first full season in the SHL up to this point. In 24 games, 8 goals, 7 assists for 15 points, really showing the offensive flair on top of the base that I think is just very projectable. But even though I expected him to be a decent SHL player this year, I don't think I expected this type of offensive production. I mean, the fact that he's on pace for 17 goals, 32 points, that's excellent for somebody that is still 18 years old. What makes it a bit crazier too is that he's not exactly on a stacked team by any means. Stimbra has been a weird offensive team this year, with Jonathan Dahlin being kind of the only big offensive supporter, but you can see Genborg at 18 years old in the SHL is already 3rd on his team in scoring, which is pretty magical to see. Granted, my stock on Genborg hasn't really changed too much. I still think he'll be a really good, hardworking 3rd line winger, but I think Genborg has really shown that he has a bit more offensive flair to showcase here, and similar to like a Michael Branzig-Newgard, something I think will just be that perfect complementary middle 6 wing. Now we go from Swedish forward here to Swedish goaltender here in Luve Härenstam, who has been doing really good things in the Allsvenskan as a 6th rounder by St. Louis last year. You might know Härenstam because of how much of a mainstay he is in Sweden's net with this age group, whether it be the World Juniors or just different international tournaments. And he's played okay in those tournaments, but I've never been a humongous fan of him personally. Last year I thought he was okay, especially outside of tournaments, and even at the World Juniors I don't think was exceptional, especially at the U18s, with just an .893 save percentage. But this year, he's actually been playing some pretty great hockey. Even though he was okay in the Junior 20 National last year, he's playing really good minutes in the Allsvenskan and doing really good with it too. A .914 save percentage through 16 games, a 2.13 goals against average, as a big-time hope for Sweden's goal over these next couple of World Juniors. Him playing as well as he has this year is pretty huge for them. St. Louis has taken some pretty interesting swings, especially with late-round goaltenders, players like Vadim Zrenko in the past, but Härenstam could be an interesting one as maybe a future backup one day, especially for how he's progressing, how he's tracking right now. At 18 years old, he's doing about as good as you can want. Now let's move on to a prospect that has proven me wrong so far this year in Nathan Beam out of the Kamloops Blazers. His connection so far with JP Hurlburt, draft prospect in 2026, has been magical. Beam, as a 66 overall pick by Chicago, has really grown in terms of the production this year, going from 66 points and 31 goals last year to on pace for 41 goals and 105 points this season. Now granted, again, I think a lot of that is because of how just high-end JP Hurlburt's vision and creativity is around the ice, and those two guys together, they're just perfect and really synergize each other as well. My big problem with Beam in his draft year was just the work ethic on the ice. How many times he kind of gave up on the play, wasn't using his speed to his advantage, especially wasn't using his frame to his advantage, and was just kind of waiting for the shot opportunities to come to him. I don't think that has completely changed this season, but I do think we have seen a bit more of a consistent effort level, and especially with his skating, I think that has improved quite a bit, which has allowed a lot more goals to happen. I'm still not super optimistic on him being an impact NHL player, but potentially a fourth liner who's a good opportunistic scorer. I'm starting to see the vision a bit more. On to another Nathan that's really surprised me in the CHL this year. We go on to Nathan Aspinall out of the Flint Firebirds. The Rangers actually having a success story within their prospect pool? Well, we'll see if the Rangers end up developing him correctly, but there is an interesting base here as a former 5th rounder. Of course, you can see the size. Of course, he's a Rangers draft pick, 6'7", 207 pounds. It tracks. But Aspinall is somebody that I think has really been improving over the past couple of years, going from a 47-point season last year after he was drafted to on pace for 46 goals and 103 points. For his size, he's a pretty decent skater, is starting to use that body a bit more, and that finishing ability, that release has been unbelievable in the OHL this season. That's what I think has really propelled things, but we'll see how much of a NHL future Aspinall does have. But considering the Rangers were able to give Matt Rempe an NHL job, I'm sure they'll open the pearly gates up for Aspinall here. On to our last goaltender of the list here, and somebody that I really don't see getting talked about a lot this season, in Rudy Gamon out of the Moncton Wildcats. There's a reason why he doesn't get talked about much. He was a former 169th overall pick, very nice, by Detroit in 2023, but big size at 6'4", 187 pounds, and it seemed like he just kind of needed to find the right fit and the right team for him, because in the USHL, he was okay, not fantastic by any means, and was fine for the stint he was there, but once he went to the QMJHL, it was like everything shifted for him. Last year, a 940 save percentage, a 16-0-0 record, and this year he's just continuing from that, a 922 save percentage as the full-time starter in the Q for Moncton, and just doing great things. I think was the player of the month this last month in the QMJHL too, so some pretty shining praise. I apologize, he was only QMJHL goaltender of the month last year, not player of the month. I am so sorry, and I will atone for my mistakes. I will be honest, he played so well in the second half last year that I probably should have expected this season out of him, but some prospects just slipped through the cracks and surprised me out of nowhere, and Rudy is one of those prospects. With the Red Wings having Guimond not just dominating the QMJHL, but Trey Augustine dominating the NCAA, Sebastian Costa dominating the AHL, with Michael Prado, who I still like in the USHL too, the net for Detroit is looking nasty in the future. But I did want to leave off today's video with one last player here, and I know I broke my rule here with mentioning an NHLer, but I just had to. I just needed to talk about Braden Bowman here for a second. As a Guelph Storm fan, I know Bowman pretty well, and I liked him when he was in the OHL, but I do think there was a reason why he ended up going undrafted, because he was more of a play driver, but just didn't quite have like the skill set necessary where it felt like he was worthy of a draft pick, but still put up good production, and basically since then has done everything that's been asked of him. In the AHL, playing fantastic with the minutes he's been given, and this year with Vegas earning first line minutes on that team, and so far through 11 games is 5 goals, 4 assists for 9 points. I want to make a video in the future going through his story a bit more, so stay tuned for that, but Bowman has been one of the most surprising players and prospects in the world right now for me, and even though I did like him, almost a point per game NHLer, did not expect that. But those are some of the NHL prospects that are surprising me the most so far this season. Hopefully you guys did enjoy. If you did, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell. Comment down below your thoughts on the players we mentioned today and who you're the most optimistic for and which prospects are surprising you across the world right now. And if you guys want some more videos, you can become a channel member here today by hitting the join button next to the subscribe button or hitting the link in the description down below. You can support me for just a couple bucks a month and you get exclusive videos every single week with a Q&A as well coming up here pretty soon. Exclusive emoji as well to use in the chat and exclusive member polls you guys can be a part of as well. And a big thank you to all the supporters. Their names will be up here on the screen. Absolute beauties, each and every single one of you. But I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a fantastic hockey day and goodbye.